With Sega launching a new 16-bit platform in the United States in 1989 and trying to stay relevant in the arcade industry, they sought out celebrity endorsements across the many areas of entertainment. They got sports figures on the cover of many of their titles, and in 1990, they put pop icon Michael Jackson in his very own game. Several, in fact. They were all based on the smooth criminal portion of the film Moonwalker, and has Jackson saving kidnapped children from the evil Mr. Big. The star power behind this relationship was huge. This was pre-controversy, and Jackson was easily still one of the biggest stars in the world. Sega first developed an isometric action game for their System 18 arcade board, and had a pretty good soundtrack to boot. For the Genesis and Mega Drive, Sega decided to do a side-scrolling beat-em-up, and that's what we'll be looking at today. It's one of the earliest licensed games I really wanted to play for the platform, and in this episode, I'll let you know how all that went. I hope you guys enjoy Michael Jackson's Moonwalker for the Sega Genesis. As absurd as it sounds today, the notion of Michael Jackson saving kids was actually quite reasonable in 1990. The story here is entirely centered on finding a group of kids taken by a gangster named Mr. Big. This story is neither deep or full of detail. The situation exists and that's all there is to it. The gameplay is essentially a beat-em-up with exploration elements. Michael has the ability to kick and punch his enemies into submission, and can also do some nifty magical attacks, such as a hat toss and dance moves to round out his arsenal. That's right, Mike is so awesome, he can charm his enemies into a dance to the death. Even animals can't resist his allure. On occasion, you have a chance to catch a shooting star and, wait for it, morph into a mechanical killing machine complete with jetpack and laser beams. A lot of your moves are tied to your life bar, which sort of doubles as a magic meter as well. If your life bar gets too low, you lose the magic in your attacks completely, and you are much weaker. Rescuing kids returns some life and giving you back those abilities. The stages are sort of set up so you have to go looking for the kids. Some are hidden behind doors and windows, other in car trunks and trash bins. Later stages will actually require you to explore different rooms to find everyone. Saving all the children in a level brings out Michael's pet monkey, who shows you the way out of the stage, which usually is a fight with a bunch of bad guys or a handful of really powerful enemies. Each stage is themed and takes place in areas such as a nightclub, parking garage, cemetery, and caves. There isn't a lot of hardcore platforming, but you will need to do a lot of jumping to get to certain areas. And that's pretty much it. Rescue the kids, knock out some bad guys, and break loose with an occasional dance number. That's the heart and soul of this one, and it's about as simple as an action game can get. I'd even go so far as to say the gameplay would be utterly forgettable if it wasn't for the fact that it was so unforgettable thanks to the license. I mean, besides the moveset you need to actually play the game, you also have moves that do absolutely nothing at all. You can moonwalk, grab your crotch, and strike a pose, none of which have any offensive capabilities at all. When you look at Moonwalker on the Genesis, it's not just a vehicle for Jackson, but also a wonderfully bizarre look into the mind of the man himself. Even though Moonwalker was an early game on the Genesis, it's still a great looking title. Coming in at a mere 4 megabits, what they fit into this card is pretty amazing. The main sprite is animated exceptionally well and has more moves than most games of that era. Enemies aren't bad either, and by the time you add in the dance animations for everyone, you really have to hand it to the developers for what they accomplished. Each level is broken up into multiple areas, and each setting is different with its own unique look. You get all kinds of sweet little touches too. When the game starts, Michael Jackson comes out, flips a coin across the room into a jukebox that starts both the music and the gameplay. It was developed by Sega R&D 2, which also did games like Revenge of Shinobi, eSWAT, and Castle of Illusion, and you can see the similarities in color use, sprite size, and level design. As much as I enjoy how it looks, it lacks a number of staples that made 16-bit games so impressive. You won't be getting copious amounts of parallax scrolling, nor any massive boss fights that fill the screen. It's still a good-looking title, and frankly, remains timeless in its visual appeal. Growing up in the 1980s, I was of course well aware of Michael Jackson's work. While I later went on a completely different direction listening to hard rock and metal, I still fondly remember listening to his songs. And as you might guess, Moonwalker features a number of them here. There are FM renditions of Smooth Criminal, Beat It, Another Part of Me, Billie Jean, and Bad. These tracks sound fairly good and are quite good representations of the originals. There are of course no lyrics, but the music is so recognizable you really don't need it to enjoy them. These tracks are licensed and fiercely protected content, so I really can't give you a full-blown taste of it, but here are a few snippets. Moonwalker is perhaps better remembered as a product of its time. The core of the experience here is little more than hide and go seek. The story itself doesn't matter in the slightest, and the game knows it. There are no great cinemas to explain Mr. Big's evil intentions, nor are there any to explain Michael's motivation to stop him. The gameplay, while quite responsive and fun to mess around with, is nothing particularly special either. In fact, its goofiness is at the heart of its challenge and appeal. Since your life bar and magic meter are tied into one, you messing around with dance moves and throwing your hat actually makes things more difficult. You can take a ton of damage otherwise, so if you are actually having trouble with a certain area or boss encounter, simply stop the theatrics, conserve your life bar, and you should be fine. But the appeal of this one is almost entirely dependent on what makes it so unique. The fact that you are Michael Jackson, you are playing to his music, and you are doing all these moves you have seen in real life in a video game is what this is all about. That right there is where the line is drawn for those that will and will not enjoy it. If you are or were a fan of Jackson's, all this will be a delightfully playful romp that was released at a much simpler time in the superstar's life. If you never cared for him or believed the accusations that would dog him later in life, this will likely be a throwaway title that means absolutely nothing to you. Sega also decided to bring this to the Master System in what would be a nearly identical port from the Genesis version. Stage layouts are extremely similar, gameplay mechanics are mostly the same, and they share a ton of visual assets. There are some big differences in the final stages however, particularly the boss encounters. The Sega Master System edition is also much harder thanks to its gameplay not being quite as smooth. This is pretty much the entire critique I have for this version. It all just seems so rough around the edges. It isn't quite as pretty, doesn't sound quite as good, nor does it play as well. Enemies seem to be able to hit you far easier, and you can't take nearly the same amount of damage. For what it is though, it's quite amazing looking for an 8-bit game, and it still has a lot of the charm of its 16-bit superior. What we have here is a product that relies solely on your attraction to the license itself. Michael Jackson, his music, his dancing, and his life represented an era that will likely appeal to many of you because you grew up while it was happening. He earned the label King of Pop for a reason, and he was a juggernaut once upon a time, the likes few entertainers ever dream of. And all that rubs off on the software here. Michael taking out bad guys with magical martial arts, flying robots, and dance moves may seem strange to those outside the loop, but for those of us who grew up with it, it's as natural as Mario jumping on a turtle. Sega heavily advertised this because it knew it would have big appeal among its target audience. The kids of the 70s and 80s were now teens and young adults, and they had grown up with Jackson's music their entire lives. That appeal certainly grabbed me as a 15-year-old kid looking for great Genesis software back then. I certainly recognized that the game itself was sort of okay-ish immediately, but I kept playing because it was just so cool to be a part of something so fun, silly, and for the hell of it. And that can often describe the best of the older software for a lot of these machines. You can have the best graphics, the best sound, and the most mechanically diverse gameplay all you want, but if it isn't fun, none of it means a thing. Go into Moonwalker looking to have fun, and many of you will walk away having enjoyed yourselves thoroughly. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.